Hello. Let me start with a small story. A Turkish friend of mine was riding, not long ago, a crowded metro in Istanbul when a young woman standing next to her forcefully stepped onto her foot with her high heel. My friend pulled her foot away in pain, expecting an apology. Instead, she got a torrent of rude words and even an accusation that she deliberately placed her foot under the young woman's shoe. Now, since this incident, my friend has adopted a defensive posture on public transport. She's standing like this. Now, she crosses her arms and keeps her elbows out, almost like an armor. And she does it not only in metro, but also on the streets, because people rarely step aside when approaching each other. If someone bumps into her, her elbows protect her from harder collision. Now, I want to begin here because it shows something important. Rudeness is not only a moral category, it is a climate. It is something that is becoming more and more common, and because of it, people are in a way adjusting their bodies, their expectation, and their readiness to defend themselves. Now, from psychoanalytic perspective, this can be already meaningful, because our body often, in a way, knows before our mind does. We adjust posture before we form arguments. Now, when the world feels unpredictable, the subject becomes vigilant. One could say that the elbows are a small, everyday sign of anxiety, kind of a management of anxiety, or how we try to regulate what feels unregulated, around us. Now, you have probably seen images like this on city buses and metro. Young people, and not only, so young, often don't give up seats to elderly passengers. Sometimes it is not an active cruelty that we are observing. It is that they are absorbed in their phones and that surrounding simply doesn't exist for them. Now, at this point, many people would say, we need to teach people more rules. We need to maybe punish uncivil behavior more strictly. This kind of responses are understandable. But today I want to suggest a slightly different approach. What we call rudeness isn't just a personal failure. It is also a social and political symptom of today's times. Because rudeness has been rising in many places and in many contexts at once. Now, we see it on streets, we see it in workplaces, online, and increasingly in politics. Of course, at the end of each year, politicians are often calling for solidarity, more respect, but appeals don't work, because rudeness has become a dominant mode of communication, linked to political and ideological changes that we have been experiencing in the last decades. We learn how to behave through socialization. We internalize written and unwritten rules. And we also resist them. Now, over the last half-century, this process of how we internalize the rules has shifted dramatically. One important influence is that we are living in a society of constant competition and also society full of metrics. Often, this is described as neoliberal ideology, competitiveness, individualism, and the struggle for profit. Authority has changed also. Traditional types of authorities, like parents, teachers, community leaders, who often kind of influenced people's behavior, have lost their power, and new authorities emerged. Influencers and also new types of populist leaders. And of course, internet platforms have changed how information circulates and how people communicate. And here is a crucial point. Now, it is not that the internet in some way caused rudeness. The point is that in some way, systems today reward it online and offline. Psychoanalysis gives us helpful language to understand this. Our social world is not only economic or political. It is also a world of science, norms, expectations, and especially language. Now, what French psychoanalyst Jacques Lacan called the symbolic order. So we are born into this system, of culture, which are visible and kind of invisible, we can say, elements that we internalize. Now, when the symbolic order is somehow stable, never is fully, then people roughly know what is permissible and what is shameful. Now, when it becomes unstable, when it starts shifting, changing, people often start testing limits more. And in a way, public life starts to often feel less regulated, even when laws still exist. You can feel this instability in how quickly conversations nowadays slide into contempt. Now, in the last year, at the end of the last year, the word of the year chosen by Oxford University Press was rage bite. The term captures something that we us often feel. Communication is increasingly privileging anger, provocation, confrontation, over calm, in-depth discussion. If you look at any comment section on online newspapers or online media, you see it immediately. Substantive debate is rare. Disagreement often carries an undertone of humiliation. And something important has also changed. Behavior that used to be perceived as uncivil has become more and more acceptable. Not only for politicians speaking to the public, often in quite crude way, but also for ordinary people speaking to each other. We could say the struggle for attention has started to prevail over the struggle for understanding. Now, outrage becomes in some ways socially productive. It produces attention, it produces belonging, it also produces for some a sense of self. Now, there has been also a shift from verbal humiliation to visual humiliation, amplified by the new apps, new image creation tools. People can nowadays generate humiliating or sexualized images of others, especially women, and circulate them for entertainment. I want to mention this carefully, not to make a sensation out of it, but because it reveals something structural. The cost of cruelty has dropped. You can humiliate someone in the ways that feels anonymous, fast, and easily shareable. One click and it spreads. This is an important part of the broader atmosphere that is observable today. Humiliation has become style. Attention became reward. Now, rudeness isn't only about changing standards of politeness. It is connected to an ideology that emphasizes individualism, glorifies material wealth, idealizes happiness, and promotes an imaginary idea that the right choices automatically lead to success and even satisfaction. In today's capitalism, rudeness has become also a constant at the workplace. Think of the way harshness and humiliation has been packaged as entertainment and even kind of a leadership style. Donald Trump became famous through a kind of a performative workplace cruelty. His famous words from the show The Apprentice are, "You are fired." Now, this message is now widespread. If you fail, it's your fault, because everyone can succeed if they want to. A decade ago, US politician Paul Ryan suggested that poor people need a life coach to get out of poverty. And Oprah Winfrey once said, when you get fired, you have to say thank you, because job loss supposedly gives you a fresh start that you need. Now, pause on that for a second. You lose your livelihood, and you are expected to be grateful. From a psychoanalytic perspective, this is a moral command that reaches inside the psyche. It doesn't only tell you what to do, it tells you what you are allowed to feel. Anger becomes illegitimate, grief also. And when affects are not allowed, they don't disappear. They return elsewhere as anxiety, depression, symptoms, or displaced aggression toward weaker targets. Now consider the delivery economy. Since the pandemic, many cities have seen rapid growth of delivery services. Streets filled with speedy bikers and motorcyclists racing food and packages. A particular kind of rudeness enters daily life here. Pedestrians fear over being run over. Speed becomes a measure of value. The worker is monitored by the customer. Now, the interaction is totally impersonal, as if these services were performed by a robot whose only job is to be fast. And this common kind of customer attitude in somewhere is ignorance or indifference until the delivery person is late. Then it can easily become rudeness. This ideology of take it or leave it, which very much permeates our employment conditions and also the workplace cruelty, changed people's attitude towards work. Many no longer feel devotion to institutions. And yet, paradoxically, commitment still exists on an unconscious level, often as anxiety, the feeling of guilt, and the desire to be recognized. Now, this emotional contradiction can help us explain burnout. It is not only the amount of work that causes burnout. It is humiliation, the message of replaceability, and the lack of recognition. When people feel unseen, unprotected, and replaceable, ruthlessness becomes both a symptom and a defense mechanism, and it can also become contagious. Now, here psychoanalysis adds another layer. Rudeness can be also a defense against shame. If I feel small, powerless, exposed, one way to escape this feeling is to flip it outward. I make someone else small. I displace what I can't bear internally by producing it externally. Now, rudeness and cruelty are not kind of confined only to work. They are normalized also in our cultural environment. There is hardly a television program without an element of cruelty. A presenter who interrogates with rigor, a jury member who is harsh, a show format based on mocking participants or humiliating them publicly. Just remember cooking shows, talent shows, dancing competition. They are often structured around humiliation. Who is good, who is ridiculous, who deserves to be excluded, who deserves contempt. And this matters because culture doesn't only reflect society, it trains our emotional reflexes. What we laugh at, what we tolerate, what we start to see as normal. Now, let me go back to Sigmund Freud. In very simple terms, his idea was that it is illusionary to expect a complete elimination of aggression from interpersonal relationships. Freud emphasized that aggression is part of our relationships with others, and it is often not directed only at others, but often to ourselves. Now, psychoanalysis aims to help individuals recognize aggressive emotions within themselves, to try to verbalize them, and not to respond to them with violence towards others or themselves. Hostility, that was Freud's kind of reasoning, can be sublimated, can be changed, for example, into some kind of a creative pursuit, perhaps through art, or transformed into irony, play, even humor. If we live in a community that strongly emphasizes empathy and where there is a sense also of social justice, it can also happen that an individual represses hostility into unconsciousness while consciously outside, he or she acts empathically. Freud also noted that the idea of social justice and equality in society is based on individuals limiting themselves, but of course with the expectations that others will limit themselves too. And unwritten rules teach people not to harm others. So this is all part of the social symbolic network in which we live, and I'm trying to describe. Now, in his time, in Freud's time, there was quite a lot of problem with syphilis, but not long ago we had problem with COVID, and in his time, Freud gave an interesting example of someone who is infected by syphilis and feels very angry that he's infected and others are not. There might be even a feeling of envy that others are living normal life and he's not. But because the person has internalized this sort of unwritten rules that he should not infect others, in some way the person represses this aggressive, envious feelings and consciously protects others. Now, this example is dated, but the structure is not. Civilization depends on the capacity to accept limits and not simply do whatever we want to do. Now, there is nothing wrong with having aggressive feelings, but these feelings do not demand a reaction. We do not need to act on them. They can be observed, reflected upon, put into words. The problem today is the public sphere is not encouraging reflection, but reaction. Online platforms are actually designed to privilege outrage, to get more shares, more clicks, more possibility to monetize. Those who disregard polite exchanges gain greater visibility. Uncivil behavior is optimized and privileged. The struggle for attention prevails over the struggle for understanding. All of this affects the symbolic space in which we live. When algorithms give visibility to aggressive communication, when there are apps for humiliating images, and when politicians openly use vulgar discourse, moral standards, written and unwritten, get reshaped. In contrast, when our cultural symbolic space promotes politeness and tact, this should not be simply perceived as moral kindness, but as a different type of symbolic regulation of enjoyment. Different one from the one that kind of promotes rudeness. When we are rude, we are not only violating etiquette, we actually are testing the limits of the symbolic framework that regulates what can be said and what cannot be said. Norms of politeness restrain expression, while provocative language seeks enjoyment in transgressing the limits. In some way, rude language is the obscene underside of politeness. Now, rudeness introduces a moment of shock. Crude speech, in some way, disrupts established discourse and through excess points at the gap in it. Through impolite speech, language is also experienced as force, revealing that there is something in language that exceeds meaning. In plain terms, coarse speech can feel powerful because it bypasses expectation and goes straight for an impact. For the individual, rudeness can be a way of seeking enjoyment in transgression, but it can also serve as a group-forming tool. Think of adolescents group or criminal gangs. They kind of form an identity through rudeness. Now, it can also be a desperate attempt to sort of escape apathy or to shake dormant community. Now, if rudeness has always played a role in transgressing norms, today there has been a shift. It has also been strongly promoted by authoritarian leaders. The cruelty of some populist leaders is no longer hidden. On the contrary, it's publicly displayed. Rudeness becomes therefore less a rebellion against rules and more a sign that rules are not binding. Often first for the leaders, but then quite often people perceive it for themselves too. Now, and this returns us to the central question. It is not only why people are rude, it is what kind of society is producing this and rewarding it. In London Underground Station, I have recently observed signs which are reminding passengers to look around and offer seats to those who need them, because it says disability is often invisible. In time when many passengers look only at their phones and don't notice others, such signs are almost desperate attempts to combat ignorance. Now, if norms of politeness collapse, the path to open violence becomes wider. And yes, we can protect ourselves with raised elbows, like my friend in Turkey is doing, but we can also resist with something else, with reason, with thought, with the capacity to pause. And let me end with 3 small forms of resistance, things which are not heroic, but doable. First, insert a pause between feeling and reacting. Second, refuse humiliation as entertainment. Don't share, don't amplify it. Third, maybe do a small act of recognition daily. Give a seat, thank the worker, say sorry, make eye contact. And in bleak times, we can turn to books. I like this image from Santiago streets. And of course, it is very good to read some important writers like Bertolt Brecht. We are remembering 70 years of his death this year. He insisted that things will not remain as they are, that doubt can be beautiful, and that thinking can bring change. Now, Brecht questions, in the dark times, will there be singing? Yes, there will be singing, he says, about the dark times. But perhaps the most important is the message that he also gave us. Brecht says, he who fights can lose. He who doesn't fight has already lost. Thank you.